In just 47 seconds, one of Britain's most respected actors went from calm guest to absolute fury, unleashing a verbal takedown on live television that left the studio in complete shock. What started as a simple conversation about theater quickly exploded into one of the most dramatic exits in talk show history, with Sir Ian McKellen storming off the Loose Women set after an explosive clash with host Denise Welch. Before we dive into the chaos that unfolded last night, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the confrontations nobody wants you to see, and the moments that reveal what really happens when the cameras are rolling. The atmosphere in the Loose Women studio last night started off warm enough. Sir Ian McKellen, wearing his signature elegance, sat beside Denise Welch on the famous purple sofa. The legendary actor had come on to discuss his upcoming theater production and reflect on his incredible 7-decade career on stage and screen. The panel seemed thrilled to have him, and the first few minutes went smoothly as they chatted about his early days in repertory theater. But then Denise shifted the conversation. She leaned forward with that look she gets when she thinks she's about to make great television, and said something that would set off a chain reaction nobody saw coming. Denise smiled at him and asked about his private life, specifically whether being openly gay had hurt his career in the early days. Now, on the surface, that might seem like a reasonable question, but it was the way she asked it that made Sir Ian's expression change immediately. "Ian, we all know you've been very brave about your sexuality," Denise began, emphasizing the word brave in a way that made it sound almost patronizing. "But do you ever think that maybe you came out too early? Like, if you'd waited until now, when things are so much more accepting, maybe you'd have had even bigger film roles?" The other panelists went quiet. You could see them exchange glances, sensing that something was off about the question. Sir Ian's smile faded. He sat back in his chair and looked at Denise with an intensity that seemed to make the temperature in the studio drop several degrees. "I'm sorry, what exactly are you suggesting?" he asked, his voice calm but with an edge that anyone could detect. Denise, apparently not reading the room, pressed on. "Well, I'm just saying that the timing might not have been ideal for your career. You know, strategically speaking. I mean, you're a brilliant actor, but you have to admit you've mostly done theater work and character roles in films rather than leading man parts." Sir Ian's jaw tightened. "So you're suggesting I should have stayed in the closet to play romantic leads opposite women? That I should have lied about who I am, hidden my truth, lived in fear, all for the possibility of playing roles that frankly didn't interest me anyway?" The studio audience started to murmur. Some people were nodding along with Sir Ian, while others looked uncomfortable. Denise, instead of backing down or apologizing, doubled down on her point. "I'm not saying you should have lied, Ian. I'm just asking if you ever wonder what if. It's a fair question. We're just having a conversation here." Sir Ian leaned forward now, and when he spoke, his voice had the full power and precision of someone who had commanded stages for decades. "No, Denise, it is not a fair question. What you're actually asking is whether I regret being honest about who I am. You're implying that my openness about my sexuality was a career miscalculation, as if authenticity is something that should be weighed against professional advancement." Denise tried to interrupt, holding up her hand. "Now, hang on a second. I didn't say that." But Sir Ian wasn't having it. "Yes, you did. That's exactly what you said. You suggested I came out too early, implying there's a right time to tell the truth about yourself, as if being gay is some sort of strategic card to play rather than simply who you are." The other panelists were frozen, unsure whether to step in or let this play out. The camera operators seemed just as stunned, keeping their shots tight on the two of them as the confrontation escalated. Denise's face was getting red now, and her voice took on a defensive tone. "I think you're being a bit oversensitive here, Ian. I was trying to have an honest discussion about the challenges you faced." And that's when Sir Ian really let her have it. "Oversensitive? Let me tell you something about honesty, Denise. I came out publicly in 1988 on a BBC radio program while fighting against Section 28, a vile piece of legislation designed to prevent the so-called promotion of homosexuality. I did that knowing it could end my career. I did it because staying silent while my community was being legislated against felt like a betrayal of everything I believed in." His voice was rising now, filling the studio with decades of passion and conviction. I didn't come out for strategic career reasons. I came out because young people were dying from AIDS, because we were being treated as second-class citizens, because someone needed to stand up and say that we exist, we matter, and we deserve dignity. And you have the audacity to sit here and suggest I did it at the wrong time? The audience started applauding. Some people were on their feet, but Denise, looking flustered and clearly not expecting this level of pushback, tried to regain control of the segment. All right, Ian, I hear you. But there's no need to get angry with me. I'm on your side here. I've always supported the gay community. Sir Ian actually laughed at that, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. It was the kind of laugh that cuts right through false sincerity. You're on my side? Really? Because suggesting that someone should have hidden who they are for a career advancement isn't support, Denise. That's the opposite of support. That's the same thinking that kept people in the closet for decades, that made young gay people feel they had to choose between being themselves and being successful. Denise's co-hosts finally tried to step in. One of them attempted to change the subject, suggesting they take a break. But Sir Ian was just getting started. And, furthermore, he continued, turning to face Denise directly, your implication that I've only done theater work and character roles is both inaccurate and insulting. I've played Gandalf in one of the most successful film franchises in history. I've played Magneto in another massive franchise. But apparently, unless you're playing the romantic lead kissing women on screen, it doesn't count as a proper film career in your estimation. Denise tried to backtrack. I didn't mean it like that. You're twisting my words. I'm not twisting anything, Sir Ian shot back. I'm holding up a mirror to what you actually said, and you don't like what you're seeing. You invited me here under the pretense of discussing theater, and instead you've decided to question the fundamental choices I've made about living authentically. That's not journalism. That's not even good television. That's just ignorant. The word ignorant hung in the air like a bomb. Denise's face went from red to pale. You could tell she was genuinely rattled now, struggling to find words that would let her save face without backing down completely. How dare you call me ignorant on my own show? Denise said, her voice shaking slightly. I've been nothing but respectful to you. Sir Ian stood up from the sofa. The entire studio seemed to hold its breath. When he spoke next, his voice was quieter but somehow even more powerful. Respectful? Denise, respect would have been actually listening when I spoke about my work. Respect would have been understanding the weight and significance of coming out when I did. Respect would have been recognizing that my choices weren't mistakes to be analyzed but acts of courage to be acknowledged. He reached up and unclipped his microphone, the sound echoing through the silent studio. But instead, you brought me here to diminish my choices and question my career, all while claiming to be supportive. I've spent my entire life fighting against that kind of two-faced attitude, and I'm certainly not going to sit here and accept it now. Denise stood up too, looking desperate to regain control. Ian, please, you're overreacting. If I've upset you, I apologize, but you can't just walk off the show. Watch me, Sir Ian replied simply. He handed his microphone to a stunned floor manager and turned to walk off the set. But Denise wasn't done. In what can only be described as a catastrophic error in judgment, she called after him. This is exactly the kind of diva behavior people talk about behind your back, Ian. You can't handle a simple question without throwing a tantrum. Sir Ian stopped dead in his tracks. The entire audience gasped. He turned around slowly, and when he looked at Denise, his expression was one of pure contempt. A tantrum? He said, his voice dangerously quiet. I've been in this industry for over 70 years. I've won every major award there is to win. I've been knighted by the Queen for my contributions to theater and equality. And you, Denise Welch? Someone who's never achieved a fraction of what I have? Someone whose biggest claim to fame is being on a daytime chat show? You dare to call me a diva for refusing to be disrespected? The audience erupted. Some were cheering for Sir Ian. Others looked shocked at how brutal his words were. Denise looked like she'd been slapped. Let me make something very clear, Sir Ian continued, and you could hear the decades of Shakespearean training in every word. I have faced real adversity in my life. I've been discriminated against, threatened, and told I would never succeed because of who I am. I've fought battles you couldn't even imagine. So when someone like you, sitting in your comfortable studio, suggests that I made mistakes by being true to myself. Forgive me if I don't stick around to smile and nod." Denise tried one more time to save the situation, but her voice sounded weak. "Ian, I really think you're misunderstanding me. Can we please just sit back down and talk about this properly?" Sir Ian shook his head. "There's nothing to misunderstand, Denise. You've shown me exactly who you are. You're someone who thinks having gay friends means you can't say offensive things. You're someone who believes being an ally gives you permission to question whether people should have stayed closeted. That's not misunderstanding. That's seeing you clearly, perhaps for the first time." One of the other panelists tried to interject. "Maybe we should all take a breath and—" But Sir Ian held up his hand. "No. I appreciate the attempt at mediation, but this isn't something that can be smoothed over with a break in some makeup reapplication. This is about fundamental respect and understanding, both of which appear to be in short supply on this panel." Denise's face had gone through several shades of emotion by this point. Anger, embarrassment, defiance, and now what looked like genuine upset. Her voice cracked slightly when she spoke again. "Fine. If that's how you feel, then maybe it's best you leave. I don't need this kind of abuse on my show." Sir Ian actually laughed again, that same cutting laugh. "Abuse? I'm standing up for myself after being questioned about fundamental life choices, and that's abuse? Denise, you really don't understand anything, do you?" He looked at the audience then, and his expression softened slightly. "I apologize to all of you who came here expecting a pleasant afternoon. You deserved better than this. But I hope you understand why I can't stay. There are some lines that shouldn't be crossed, and questioning whether someone should have hidden their true self for career advancement is absolutely one of them." The audience gave him a standing ovation. The applause was thunderous, and through it all, Denise stood there looking absolutely gutted. Realizing that the audience was firmly on Sir Ian's side, she tried to speak over the applause, her voice rising. "Well, this is just bloody typical, isn't it? I ask one question, one simple question, and suddenly I'm the villain. I've spent years supporting the LGBTQ community, but apparently that means nothing because I dared to have a conversation." Sir Ian turned back one more time. "That's your problem right there, Denise. You think support is a shield that protects you from ever being wrong. It doesn't work like that. Real allies listen when they're told they've crossed a line. They don't double down and claim victimhood." With that, he walked off the set for good. The cameras followed him as he left through the studio doors, his posture upright and dignified even in his anger. Behind him, Denise stood alone on the set, her co-hosts looking uncomfortable and unsure of what to say. Denise tried to address the audience, her voice defensive and shaky. "Right. Well, that was certainly dramatic. I suppose we'll go to a break now and try to salvage what's left of the show. Though I have to say, I think Sir Ian McKellen seriously overreacted to what was meant as a thoughtful question about his experiences." But the audience wasn't having it. You could hear boos mixed in with the remaining applause. Someone shouted out, "He was right!" and Denise's face went red again. One of her co-hosts finally grabbed her arm gently and whispered something that the microphones didn't quite pick up, but Denise's expression suggested it wasn't supportive of her position. She looked around the studio as if searching for someone to back her up, but everyone from the producers to the floor staff were avoiding eye contact. The show's director called for a commercial break, and the lights dimmed. But in those final few seconds before they cut away, you could see Denise standing there, arms crossed, looking absolutely furious, but also, just maybe, starting to realize that she'd badly miscalculated how her questions would be received. Backstage, crew members who witnessed the aftermath said Sir Ian walked straight to his dressing room, collected his belongings, and left the building without another word. He didn't slam doors or shout at anyone. He simply left with the same dignity he'd maintained throughout his entire career. The silence of his departure was somehow more powerful than any further words could have been. Meanwhile, Denise spent the commercial break arguing with producers about whether they should address the confrontation when they came back on air or pretend it hadn't happened. According to sources, she was adamant that she'd done nothing wrong, that Sir Ian had been oversensitive and unprofessional. But the producers apparently pushed back, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, she should have approached the topic with more care. When the show returned from break, Denise's tone was noticeably different. She looked directly at the camera, her expression trying for serious but landing somewhere around defensive. Before we continue with the rest of today's show, I want to address what just happened. Sir Ian McKellen walked off our set after what I felt was a reasonable discussion about his career choices. If my questions offended him, that wasn't my intention. However, I stand by my right as a journalist to ask challenging questions. The audience remained notably quiet during this speech. No supportive applause, no sympathetic murmurs. Just an uncomfortable silence that spoke volumes about how her explanation was being received. One of her co-hosts, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation, tried to move things along. Well, these things happen in live television. Let's move on to our next segment, shall we? But Denise wasn't quite ready to let it go. I just want to say that I've always been a supporter of the gay community. My question wasn't meant to suggest Ian should have stayed closeted. It was simply exploring the challenges he faced during a different era. I think his reaction was disproportionate, but I respect his right to feel how he feels. The careful wording of that statement, the defensive tone, the attempt to both apologize and maintain she'd done nothing wrong, all of it just made the situation worse. The audience could sense the insincerity, the refusal to actually hear what Sir Ian had been saying. As the show limped on to its remaining segments, the energy in the studio never recovered. The confrontation had sucked all the life out of the room. Denise looked rattled throughout, her usual confident demeanor replaced with something defensive and brittle. Her co-hosts tried their best to keep things moving, but everyone knew that this episode would be remembered for one thing only: the moment Sir Ian McKellen walked off after refusing to be disrespected. The whole confrontation lasted less than 15 minutes from start to finish, but it felt like watching a master class in standing up for yourself. Sir Ian never raised his voice to shouting. He never used profanity or personal attacks beyond pointing out Denise's relative lack of achievements compared to his own. He simply, calmly, and devastatingly explained why her questions were offensive and why he wouldn't tolerate them. And Denise? She showed exactly what not to do when someone calls you out. Instead of listening, she got defensive. Instead of apologizing genuinely, she claimed to be a victim of oversensitivity. Instead of acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, her questions had crossed a line, she doubled down and made it worse. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. On one side, a legendary actor with decades of experience, standing firm on principles he'd fought his whole life to uphold. On the other, a talk show host so convinced of her own righteousness that she couldn't see how badly she'd mishandled the situation. What made the whole thing even more powerful was that Sir Ian hadn't gone in looking for a fight. He'd come to talk about theater, to share his passion for the stage, to discuss his craft. But when pushed into a corner by questions that fundamentally disrespected his life choices, he didn't just smile and play nice for the cameras. He stood his ground, said what needed to be said, and left with his dignity intact. Meanwhile, Denise was left standing on her own set, having just been schooled on live television by one of the greatest actors of our generation. The audience knew it. The crew knew it. And judging by her increasingly desperate attempts to justify her questions, Denise knew it too, even if she wasn't ready to admit it. As the show finally limped to its conclusion, you could see the relief on everyone's faces when they finally cut to the end credits. Denise gave her usual closing remarks, but they fell flat. How could they not, after what had just happened? Sir Ian McKellen walked off the Loose Women set last night, but he didn't storm off in a rage or throw a diva fit like Denise had suggested. He left because he refused to participate in a conversation that questioned whether he should have hidden who he was. He left because even at his age, with all his accomplishments, he's still fighting the same fight he's been fighting for decades. The fight to be respected for exactly who he is. And Denise Welch? She was left holding the pieces of an interview that went catastrophically wrong, unable or unwilling to understand why. Suggesting someone should have timed their coming out differently is exactly the kind of thinking that Sir Ian McKellen has spent his entire public life fighting against. The producers in the control room were apparently in chaos during the whole thing. Multiple crew members reported hearing shouting and panic through their earpieces as directors tried to figure out whether to cut to commercial, whether to intervene, whether to somehow salvage the segment. But in the end, they made the right call by letting it play out. This wasn't the kind of moment you cut away from. This was real, raw, and absolutely compelling television. even if it wasn't the kind anyone had planned for. What's particularly striking about the whole confrontation is how it revealed the generational and philosophical gap between performative allyship and genuine understanding. Denise clearly thought that her history of supporting gay rights gave her carte blanche to ask any question she wanted, no matter how it might land. She seemed genuinely shocked that Sir Ian would take offense, as if her intentions should somehow matter more than the impact of her words. But Sir Ian wasn't interested in intentions. He was responding to what was actually said, the implications behind the questions, the suggestion that living authentically was a career move to be strategically timed, rather than a fundamental human right to be exercised whenever someone feels ready. That's the difference between someone who's lived through real discrimination and someone who thinks they understand it from a distance. Throughout the entire confrontation, Sir Ian's co-stars from various productions would have been proud of how he handled himself. This wasn't some young actor throwing a tantrum because they didn't like a question. This was a man who has literally been knighted for his services to drama and equality, refusing to let his life's work and choices be reduced to a strategic miscalculation by someone who clearly didn't understand the gravity of what coming out meant in his era. The timing of the confrontation makes it even more significant. We're living in an age where LGBTQ rights are being rolled back in various parts of the world, where trans people especially are facing increased discrimination, where the hard-won victories of previous generations are being challenged. For someone like Sir Ian, who fought those battles when they were even more dangerous, to hear someone suggest he should have waited for better times must have felt like a slap in the face to every young person who needed to see openly gay role models back then. Denise's repeated claims that she was just asking questions, just having a conversation, showed a fundamental misunderstanding of power dynamics and context. When you're sitting in a position of power as a host, with cameras rolling and an audience watching, your questions aren't neutral. They carry weight. They can reinforce harmful ideas even when that's not your intention. And when someone with Sir Ian's experience and standing tells you that your questions cross the line, the appropriate response isn't to get defensive and claim victimhood. The audience's reaction throughout the confrontation was telling. They weren't just applauding Sir Ian because he's famous or because he gave good sound bites. They were applauding because he was articulating something that many people feel but struggle to express. That being asked to justify or second-guess fundamental aspects of your identity is exhausting and offensive, no matter how it's dressed up as curiosity or conversation. What made Denise's handling of the situation particularly bad was her inability to just stop talking. Every time she tried to defend herself or explain her questions, she just dug the hole deeper. If she'd simply said, "Sorry, I understand why that was offensive, and I should have approached it differently," the whole thing might have ended very differently. But her need to be right, to maintain that her questions were valid and that Sir Ian was overreacting, turned what could have been a teachable moment into a complete disaster. The fact that she called him a diva was perhaps the most revealing moment of all. It showed that underneath all her claims of support and allyship, she still saw his response as theatrical rather than genuine. She couldn't conceive that his anger was justified, that his walking off wasn't a performance but a principled stand. To her, it was all drama and overreaction, which completely missed the point of everything he'd been saying. Sir Ian's parting shots about Denise's achievements compared to his own might have seemed harsh, but in context, they were entirely justified. She'd questioned his career choices, implied his openness about his sexuality had limited his opportunities, and then called him a diva for objecting. At that point, reminding her of the vast difference in their accomplishments wasn't petty. It was putting her in her place, making it clear that someone with her relatively modest career had no standing to critique the choices of someone who's achieved what he has. The other panelists' discomfort throughout the segment was palpable. You could see them trying to figure out how to intervene without making things worse, whether to support Denise or distance themselves from her questions. Their silence spoke volumes. None of them jumped to her defense when Sir Ian was laying out exactly why her questions were problematic. None of them tried to suggest he was overreacting. They knew she'd messed up, even if she didn't. What this confrontation really highlighted is the difference between supporting a community and actually understanding their lived experiences. Denise probably has attended Pride events, probably has gay friends, probably considers herself an ally, But when it came down to it, she revealed that she doesn't really get it. She doesn't understand what it cost people like Sir Ian to be open about who they are when society was even more hostile than it is now. She doesn't understand that timing isn't something you get to critique from the comfort of a more accepting era. The show's attempt to continue after Sir Ian left was almost painful to watch. How do you move on from something like that? How do you go back to discussing celebrity gossip or fashion trends when you've just witnessed a masterclass in standing up against subtle homophobia disguised as journalistic curiosity? The answer is you don't really. You go through the motions, but everyone knows the show is effectively over from the moment he walked off. What makes this whole confrontation so powerful is that it wasn't scripted or planned. This wasn't a bit designed to go viral. This was a genuine clash between two very different worldviews, played out in real time with real emotions and real consequences. Sir Ian's anger was real. Denise's defensiveness was real. The audience's support for him was real. None of it was manufactured for clicks or ratings, which is probably why it resonated so strongly. The theater lights might have dimmed on Loose Women last night, but the spotlight on this confrontation is just beginning to shine. Because what happened wasn't just about one badly handled interview. It was about respect, about understanding, about the difference between claiming to support people and actually listening when they tell you something is wrong. And on all those counts, Sir Ian McKellen emerged victorious, while Denise Welch was left to contemplate how badly she'd misjudged the situation.